Call to order the Homewood Board of Zoning Adjustments meeting for June 2022. The first item on the agenda is roll call.
All right. Mr. Gear. Mr. Roberts.
Here.
Mr. Foley.
Here.
Ms. Hand.
Here.
Mr. Perkel.
Here.
Mr. Alsabrook. And Mr. Wortley.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda are the minutes approval from May 2022. Are there any comments or notes from the board?
I have no comments other than I reviewed them and they look good to me.
Okay. I'll take a motion, or I guess we'll take a vote on
Yeah.
approval. All those in favor of approving the minutes from May 2022?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the motion. Who made the motion to approve it? You can-
I'll make a motion.
You can make a approve by acclamation, but I need a motion and a second. So,
Okay, I'll move to approve the minutes from May.
all right,
I'll second it.
all right. That's it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. All right. Next item on the agenda are any communications from the chair. I have none. Any communications from the vice chair?
No.
All right, we'll get on to old business. Which, there you go.
That was.
There is none on old business, so the new business, just for the record, BZA case 220603, 3006 Cook Street is being carried over to next month. So first case on the agenda would be BZA case SV 220602, 313 East Glenwood Drive. If you're here to speak on this case, please step forward, state your name and address for the record.
But before they present their case, did you want to?
Yes, and I would like to
announce?
point out, we do have a quorum with 4 members of the board, but to approve a case, you need a supermajority, which in this case means that all 4 of us would have to vote in favor to pass. So just keep that in mind.
And as such, we typically give the applicants an opportunity, if they want to carry it over to the next month's meeting when more members might be present, you may do so, or else to go forward and present the case.
So if we voted 3 out of 4 tonight, we could still carry over to next month?
No.
No?
All 4 members must be in agreement to approve the variance. It's all or nothing, but that's fine.
But they can ask to carry it over prior to a vote. Right?
He would have to request now to carry it over. You couldn't take a vote and then say, oh, let me carry it over. No.
But
You
you
would-
can present the case.
Well, you may go ahead and present since everyone's here,
Okay.
but if you want
I
the
think
board to
I think
take a
we'll go ahead
vote
and do it this
tonight,
week.
it would,
Yeah.
you just need to be aware that all 4 members have to be in agreement.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
All
that's
right.
fine.
All right. I'm Elton Douthit. I'm the contractor. And do I need to give my address or the address of the variance?
Your address.
My address is 601 Grove Street. At the residence in question is 313 East Glenwood Drive. They're wanting to install a porch on the front of their house and pretty much square it off with the existing footprint of the house. So we're requesting a extension of a nonconformity, I think is the wording of it. But, I mean, if y'all see it and if y'all have any questions for me, that's pretty much the gist of it.
This is a public hearing. If there's anyone from the public that wants to speak on the case, please step forward and state your name and address for the record. Does not appear that anybody is here to speak on the case. So I will close the public portion of the hearing and open the case up to the board for questions.
I just want to make sure I understand, looking at the photo that was up a second ago, you're saying you're going to build it flush to where the house is, on the right side where the steps are going up, is that what you're talking about?
Where the right side, the far right side of the house is, you see where the gutter goes down?
Right.
That'll be, that side of the house will continue out to be flush with the front of the house.
Okay, you're just squaring off that front corner?
Yes, sir.
And I'm putting a roof on, okay.
Yes, sir. Just like pictured there.
It's sort of illustrated on this drawing that you
Yeah,
got in your
that's kind of,
packet.
yeah, I saw that, but
Okay.
Does the, do we have to ask the
Things that
public?
are on this rendering are not happening.
Yeah, it's that, we're only doing the right side here,
They're
yeah.
only doing the right side.
Oh, perfect.
You see the columns that are shown on the left side, and there's a dormer and different things. That's not happening. That's not a part of this application. I confirmed that before we accepted the application, but it's only the existing porch that's on the right side will have a
So do the stairs, they remain or are they new? I guess I'm looking at this sketch.
It'll be new set of stairs.
So,
So the stairs will actually come out further than the front of the house as is now, if that makes any sense. The porch will square off and the stairs will come off of that.
the stairs not under the roof.
Right,
The new part.
right.
I'll move we approve case SV 22-06-01.
A second?
All right. Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
Ms. Hand,
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
Mr. Perkel,
Yes.
and Mr. Foley.
yes. Your case has been approved. You have 180 days to pull your permit.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is BZA case SV 220604, 1720 through 1724, 27th Court South. If you're here to speak on the case, please step forward and state your name and address for the record.
Get final approval with the members up there, whether it's a go or no go. And we're ready to go. My name is Mike Brandt. I'm an attorney in town. I represent the applicant, Rosedale Central LLC. Tim Coker, the principal, is here. Should there be any questions about the business aspects that I can't answer. My address is 800 Shades Creek Parkway, 35209. This is about the former Jim and Jim space right around the corner. Just by way of history, my client purchased the property, or put it under contract in 2020. And during our due diligence inspections, they did all the right things in trying to ascertain the conformance of zoning and everything else. And they were assured by, city officials that the existing conditions, including the parking, would be fine as long as they utilize the property for permitted use. In fact, we have emails from the city planner about that. The city building inspector. Before that, it was a non-conforming use. Jim and Jim's was not permitted in the C4 zoning classification, but it pre-existed. It was grandfathered in. And so they are using it for permitted uses. They, based upon those assurances, they closed, purchased the property, and leased it up and opened up the Cahaba Cycles property, which has been open for a while. And then the other two tenants are signed up and ready to go, but they've been unable to get building permits because at that time, they were told that they had to bring the parking into conformance, so they filed the variance request. The request that was filed initially was to change, to permit 2 spaces per 1,000 square feet, where the ordinance requires 3 per 1,000. Last week, they just retained me last week, and we looked it over and discovered that they had a parking agreement in place with Express Oil Space right down the street. In fact, I didn't send it in, I just got involved the day before Ms. Montgomery told us your packets were going out, so I sent you the lease. And I do have a little map, it may be helpful. Can I approach and let you look at this?
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Thank you. That's just to show, show very aware that off-site parking with an agreement, we do have an agreement for off-site parking is permitted within 150 feet. This is more than 150, a little bit. I said in a letter that it's in your packet, it was 275. That's measured to the Express Oil building. It turns out the lot's behind the building, so it's 275 plus around the building, so it's a little more. But their offer is to use those new spaces solely for employees, which would make the retail traffic, certainly more acceptable. The tenants have agreed that their employees will park in the leased space, and that would save the existing spaces on site and across the street at the Dance Foundation. They also have leased spaces, which are within 150 feet, those are conforming, would all be available for customers. So, and keep in mind, that's a little further than 150 feet, but the hotel spaces, Valley Hotel, their employees are required to park, right beneath our feet, which is in this public space decks, which is 800 feet away. And that's public parking spaces. We're not asking for any burden at all on any of Homewood's public parking. We have leased the space for our own use, and we're paying the rent on it, and our employees will park there. So to me, but for the assurances we got before they bought the property, we wouldn't have bought it, wouldn't be here, but we think that solution is good for everybody. Everybody goes away happy. With the leased spaces, we have 54 spaces available, and the ordinance requires 45. So we've got 9 additional parking spaces between on-site, leased across the street, which are conforming, and leased down the street, which are a little further away than is conforming. So we're asking to either permit a variance to allow 2-for-1 on site based on the fact that we have the lease, which has a 20-year term, 10 years plus a 10-year renewal, or to allow a variance on the 150-foot requirement and allow us to.
I'm sorry, that's not an option tonight. The only variance before the board tonight would be the reduction from 3 to 2.
I understand.
But, so that other.
I understand.
Would be,
Well, it's in the material submitted. I'm asking to consider the fact that we have the additional parking down the street when considering the initial variance we've requested. So I'm not asking for the variance was not filed for the 150. We mentioned it in our letter, in your packages, but that was after the filing, correct, Ms. Williams? So, but you, I am correct, I believe I'm correct, that you're certainly able to consider the fact we have the lease parking, and you could condition your variance on the fact that we have that lease, and we'll do whatever we want with the lease. So, with that in mind, I just see if you have any questions for either me or Mr. Coker. Excuse me.
This is a public hearing.
It's up to you.
So was the question before?
No, there's no question. I'm sorry. This is a public hearing. I'm sorry.
Well,
I was just asking if he wants to go ahead based on the fact we can't get a variance on the 150 feet.
do you wish to speak on your case?
I can't really add any more facts to the case other than what Mr. Brandt's presented, so I guess not.
Okay.
We do have we do have, in addition to the 21, well, we have 21 spaces on site as we speak. we have the 12 across the street immediately accessible, which are leased from the Dance Foundation. And then we have the additional 15 spaces that are in the remote lot by the Express Oil Change.
It's
as you
20,
mentioned.
it's 20 in that lot.
20 lot, okay, 20 in the
20
lot.
spaces in that lot.
So-
It's in the lease.
Yeah. The other thing is, we've actually laid out where we can find, we've determined we can probably put 3 more spaces on the western side of the building and 2 or 3 potentially, Kale, I'm not sure if we ever confirmed it, but we can potentially expand down the northern alley, the northern side of the building. We're doing what we can to maximize parking on the property and immediately accessible to us.
And we're willing to offer to put the 5 additional spaces in.
Sure.
As- Well, we'd also
Assuming
accept the
that-
condition.
Assuming it's
in the-
approved down the northern alley side,
build the
northern
additional spaces.
side of our building along the alley.
So I would encourage not to proffer those yet, because those are in the right of way.
Okay.
Oh, I just heard of it just now.
Right.
I mean, we're, as an owner, we're trying to, we're doing all we can to maximize parking, so.
Would you mind stating your name and address?
I'm
just for the
sorry.
record?
Sure. Tim Coker, 2762 BM Montgomery Street, Homewood 35209.
Great, thank you. This is a public case. If you're here to speak on the matter, please step forward and state your name and address for the record. Does not appear that anyone wants to speak today, so I will close the public portion of the hearing and open the case up to the board for questions.
So you mentioned that you're leasing parking spaces from both Express Oil Change and the Dance Foundation?
Yes, ma'am.
Where are the spaces for Express Oil Change?
If you look at the picture I just gave you, that was not in the packet, I just came into this kind of late, I'm sorry. The yellow box is the subject property, his property, Mr. Cook's property. The green is Express Oil building, the parking is around behind it,
And how many spots is that supposed to be?
20 in the lease.
They can actually fit 20 back there? It seems
We
like
haven't
small.
reviewed it. That was not a part of our consideration when we did our report. It came in after the submittal deadline. He had sent it in just saying, oh, we've got this, just so you know, we've got this other area that we're gonna use for employee parking. So then, everything that they can offer, from the at the Dance Foundation and on site, will be for customers. They are going to commit to having employees park on site behind. And so it wasn't really even something that we have to consider at this point. When it's, we'll look at it to make sure that it's the right surface and the right size spaces and all of that kind of thing when they get ready to do it. Tonight, we're just looking at what they have to offer at the Dance Foundation and on site.
And right now, with only the Dance Foundation and on-site, it's 2 per 1,000?
Well, it's actually a little bit over the 2 per 1,000. When we reviewed this, these are not typical cookie cutter uses. And the zoning ordinance states that parking is determined by the square footage of the building, not the customer service area, or that you can remove those private spaces that customers aren't allowed to go into. Many cities do allow that, or some cities do allow for you to do that. And that was actually some information that Mr. Coker had gotten from before. But the zoning ordinance is very clear that it's based on square footage. The use for the medical office is not, the medical use is not like a doctor's office. Patients don't visit, it's a respiratory, almost a supply office, they'll be taking orders, they'll deliver things from there.
It's not a outpatient clinic.
It's not an
Okay.
outpatient clinic, it's not that's what I'm saying, none of these uses are really traditional cookie cutter uses. Then the dog daycare, they have an app where, you know, the customers they'll greet the customer and they'll come out, so it's kind of a pickup kind of a thing.
It's curbside pickup.
Curbside.
Mhm.
They make arrangements ahead of time. They dial in and out, they pull
And
in, an attendant comes out, they drop their pet, and then.
Much and over half of that space is for staff and the dogs. So, let's just say, you know, you were to count only the space that was allowed for the customers, you know, just the front. The same would apply to, Cycles. There's a large area that's used for their storage and where they assemble the bicycles or work on bicycles, right there. So there's a large area of that space that is not accessible to customers. So when we reviewed all of this, we looked for other districts that allow for these uses and checked what the requirement was for the parking. C2 allows for these uses and requires 2 per thousand instead of 3 per thousand. If you go, and if you change the calculation of these, using the whole square footage of the buildings, like the code requires, then they have 2 spaces over.
What happens when, those uses change,
If the
like in
use-
a year or 3 years?
If the board chooses to approve the variance, you're approving the variance based on this application that's presented, based on these site conditions, based on these uses. If in the future, these site conditions or uses change, then, if they were non-conforming that time, they would have to request another variance.
All right, Ms. Hand, if I can elaborate, that's a very good answer. This came up when they were trying to pull building permits. And so for the first space, everything was fine because they were the only one there. The second and third space, trying to pull those building permits, and those uses are examined, that's when it came up. So if you would approve the variance and the dog daycare leaves and someone wants to put in a boutique or something like that, if we try to sign a lease for that and get a building permit, it would be examined as a different use, and you'd have to examine all the parking, is my understanding of it.
It would get triggered in
A review.
a business license review.
So not only a building permit, but a business license
Correct,
application.
well, we review business licenses also, and, this, you know, you wanna make sure, like like Mr. Purple had asked about earlier, that you, mentioned that in any motion that you seconded.
I would assume at this point, well, I think you said the Cahaba Cycles, obviously, they're in the middle of the lease, or they're the beginning part of the lease. Did you say it was a 10-year lease with a 10-year renewal?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Well, actually, Ferris Malky does have a 10-year lease, and he's also a partner in the building. He's an owner in the real estate in Rosedale Central LLC. So therefore, he's committed to a very long-term stay.
Will you,
And the
you
other
ask about
leases-
their lease or the parking lease?
Well, you'd mentioned earlier 10-year lease with a 10-year
I was talking
renewal
about the
period.
parking.
I didn't
Yeah,
know.
he was referring to he was.
I was talking about the parking
Off-site
lease.
parking,
I
but-
know, I'm not aware of the terms of their
Yeah,
lease.
but I am. And the leases are for Ferris. He has a 15-year lease, but he's a owner in the building. I don't think he has intentions of going anywhere. And then the other two are 10-year leases each and then they kick into 5-year renewals.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
I have a question. In a lot of the areas that that we go to, there's designated parking. So you got 3 tenants here. Is there gonna be designated parking for each tenant?
There's not yet. There will be a drop-off spot, or a couple of drop-off spots designated for Dogtopia. They've requested that. And in of the 21 spaces we have across the front, would be what we would do there. Cobb Cycles is the only tenant there thus far, and it's not been a problem.
Okay.
What about the leased parking spots from the Dance Foundation? Are those labeled? And
I'm sorry?
Are those labeled or identified?
They are not, actually. We do need to label those for Rosedale Central parking, or, you know, and yes, but we plan to do that. We plan to do that.
So they're not flex spaces, you lease those and they are marked for?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
She asked about this proceeding today to the Dance Foundation owner, and she was wondering whether our variance would put any more burden on her spaces, and that's the answer, that we have a
Yes.
certain number of spaces, and by designating them, it'll make it easier to monitor.
Yeah, we've been monitoring her, she's been monitoring, we've been watching this fairly closely. And we sort of have a good neighbor policy between the two of us. And she's obviously the most, you know, neighbor in the closest proximity, so.
What are the current employees of Cahaba Cycle who are working, where are they parking? You mentioned, I believe, you still need to stripe the parking behind Express Oil Change. Are they currently parking behind, using the lease?
No, sir, they're actually parking across in the Dance Foundation parking lot on the far end.
Okay, and that would change going forward
Yeah,
once the,
we've not utilized Express Oil a lot whatsoever. It's been in place for over a year.
Okay.
Tim Lunsford, and,
Yeah.
but it's not been utilized. It's for future use as property expands.
We did execute the lease on the property, on that parking, from the owners of the Express Oil property when we purchased.
I mean, it was February of '21.
You're also gonna have
correct.
bike parking, is that correct?
Pardon me?
You're gonna have bike parking?
We do have, there's a lot of bike parking. And what's interesting is there's, you know, you'll see lots of bikes out there, you'll see lots of people sitting outside having coffee or what have you, and there are hardly any cars out front. And we're still looking at one space being designated for EV charging station if they get, you know, they sell battery powered bikes, so they want to be able to charge those as well as an electric vehicle, should that ever be the case. But right now, there's really not been a burden created on any adjacent property owners by our parking. None of the cars that have been parking none of the cars at the location to do business with Cobb Cycles have even spilled over into the former Nadu furniture lot, which is adjacent. We're never even occupying those spaces, and that owner has actually said we could, if need be, but there's not been the need. Between the designated spots, between those spots that are obviously Cobb Cycles right there in front, and then those that are across the street where employees right now are parking, there's just not been a real enormous burden created.
Something else, just for general knowledge. The code requires that they provide a pedestrian walkway, a defined pedestrian walkway from across the street to their property. So it'll have to be painted, you know, as a walkway, just something for you to keep in mind.
Great, I was thinking that.
And we'll do that. We'll paint a pedestrian crosswalk there, per what city requirement, whatever the requirements are from engineering.
This is a little off topic, but are there plans to potentially stripe some parallel spots on the wide portion of 27th Court?
That's been discussed. There aren't any plans in place to make that happen.
Is it feasible?
It's certainly feasible, yeah. And not a bad idea.
But, Mr. Foley, I will say that there's, it's not marked right now, but they are utilized for that purpose, both parallel, to the west of our property, down heading westward on 27th, and then also across the street, heading westward in front of the foundation building, dance foundation building, along that curve. So that, it's happening regardless of whether it's really striped or not right now. So,
Is your lease with the Dance Foundation, is that 24/7, or is it based on certain hours?
no, it's 24/7. Yeah, we lease it, it's not a cross-parking agreement. Although they do, on church Sundays, they have a church that meets in their building, and they quite often park over on our property.
Yeah, they're definitely, there's like Dance Foundation on Saturday morning, it gets pretty crowded.
And, yeah. And people are out riding bikes and not typically at the bike shop on Saturday morning, so it works out okay.
Is Dogtopia open on the weekends?
Pardon me?
Is-
Yes, well, but yes, but their their typical operation will require fewer employees. Dogtopia's drop-off, it's grooming and pet daycare and overnight boarding. So they have a lot of drop-offs on Fridays typically for the
Yeah, for the
weekend, and but their interaction pickups won't go on Saturdays typically. Then on Sundays, Sunday or Monday mornings, I guess, it'd be a pickup time. But again, a lot of them are using the app, and at least that's what their transactions are showing at other locations.
Yeah.
I'm not the expert on that. There's a Dogtopia guy here that their franchisee can answer all these detailed questions. But, we've been in the midst of that for a while, trying to figure out how to decode this.
How many full-time employees does Dogtopia and the kind of respiratory business?
Dogtopia they are saying they're gonna have 8 to 10, Monday through Friday. And then, and I believe they said 4 to 6 on the weekends. And then, including personnel, delivery and warehouse personnel, I think what Total Respiratory has said is they would have 7 to 10, but that includes the 2 delivery and 1 warehouse clerk. So they wouldn't be out front, they would be in the back. So,
Are the Dogtopia employees shift employees, or do they plan to have 8 to 10 at one time?
The peak of the curve would be 8 to 10, as I said, and I think they are more shift not because of it's like a 3 shift a day operation, but because it's to meet the demand of the peak hours, so to speak. And the good news about that is, I don't know exactly all these operating trends of their businesses, but from 5 to 8 on Fridays, you'll probably have the peak of the drop-off business, and Hop Cycles closes at 6 every day, either 5 or 6.
Dogtopia's owner did email those numbers, same numbers you said, and that they agreed to require everybody to park down the road behind Expresso.
That's correct. They have agreed to off-site parking. So it's about as non-impactful as you can. Now, Sherry was making a point earlier that is the difference in, say, a C2 zoning that would that would allow these uses and goes to within a C2, you go to a 2 parking spaces per 1,000 requirement. The other key thing here is that, again, Cobb Cycles, the back part of Dogtopia, and then about a good, almost 40% of total respiratory space is non-occupied, non-retail,
Non-public.
non-public space. I mean, if you go behind about halfway through Cobb Cycles right now, there's stacks of bicycles. There are not a lot of people hanging around in those. Stacks of bicycle boxes,
And your ordinance does allow to exclude non-public spaces for lots of uses, such as hospitals, universities, schools, funeral homes, hotels, but not specifically these uses, but it's not unheard of that you always consider the whole building. I mean, the ordinance doesn't carve out these particular uses from that requirement, but it's considered in some, which I don't know why, but it is.
Okay. I motion to approve BZA case SB 22-06-04.
May I request clarification? There were two variances. We haven't talked about that second one, just to allow direct
Whoops.
access from a public street to the parking spaces. So there were actually two variances that are being requested.
Got it.
So I didn't know if the board wants to vote on them at the same time or separate them out, or,
Did anybody have any questions on that part?
And my only comment on that one, and I apologize, thank you, Mr. Goodman, is that our hardship there is that that's just the inherited condition that we inherited. Is we haven't changed that park in the building. When it was Jim and Jim's, that's how you parked, and you backed out onto 27th Court, which is not a real heavy-duty thoroughfare, but it is a public street, so it would require a variance. We acknowledge that. And we were willing to proffer the condition that we have the off-site parking available as well, that we'll keep that, if that makes a difference.
yeah, it's just a requirement of the city's zoning ordinance, to permit that. And then beyond that, the request and clarification, as Sherry was mentioned earlier, was there an understanding or that the variances, if they are approved, are based on site conditions and specific to this, and uses? Was that part of your motion?
I guess,
I
do
think-
we have to choose to vote on the variances separately?
You don't, you can vote as one case, or you can vote for the two variant, vote separately, you can do it either way.
Do you guys want to do it separately to get the first one out of the way?
Well, I think is it up to the applicant if they want to split it or
Yeah,
not?
they can split it,
Yeah.
but-
I guess,
One doesn't really work without the other, but.
Right, so.
Yeah. I just wanted to note that there were two separate variances
Let me pause.
that were
that.
advertised and presented, so that your motion can include both of them.
Got it.
Yeah.
Let me nix that.
You wanna withdraw?
I would like to withdraw my motion.
So there wasn't a second, so.
Yeah, no, there was no second.
Do we have any more questions on the other variants?
Y'all may remember, we had one recently with this exact thing on Linden.
Right.
It's just the,
Right,
it's in the code.
it's frequently throughout the city, you'll see that. We've had other cases as well, beyond that, Linden too. It's still on the books, and therefore, in order to be compliant.
Yeah,
it
keep in
needs
mind,
to
all
be-
the public parking downtown backs into this
Yeah.
industry, it's just the way it is. But it does require variance, because this is not public parking, it's private.
We live a block from here, we go downtown and do business all the time. And as we all do, I'm sure in this room, and that it works if you just pay attention to what you're doing. I mean, it's a minimal variance, obviously, the direct access to a street or public right of way. So
but the variance is bestowed to the building and business license applicant, not the property. Is that?
I think I clarified it in the email. Because that was Mr. Purple's concern. This variance is for this application based on these site conditions and based on these uses.
So,
Any of that changes, it will be re-reviewed, and if it is non-compliant, another variance would be required, and they would have to come back and request another variance.
so the proffer to make this contingent upon the use doesn't really matter, because it's always, if the use changes.
If the use changes, it's, because this variance is specific to these uses and these site conditions.
All right,
As-
that's all I wanted.
So it wouldn't be necessary to include it as, with that understanding?
not-
It's gonna.
It's not a proffer, it's
Right.
just Mr. Purple was concerned, would it be forever and ever amen that way? And, you know, and I said that he was concerned about that 5 years from now, we are all gone. And so there's no one on staff who remembers this meeting or the context, then perhaps you want to make your motion a little more detailed.
Belt and suspenders approach is what, a belt and suspenders approach
Right.
is what you're saying. Okay.
Well, I move to approve case SV 220604 with the variance modifying only those standards specifically outlined by the applicant and based on the site conditions and proposed uses of the documentation per this case.
Cal second.
And that motion included the second variance, the direct access to and from? the
That is
street?
correct.
Okay. All right.
And I'll second.
All right, Mr. Ball. All right. All right, I'll begin with you, Mr. Perkel.
Yes.
Ms. Hand,
Yes.
Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
and Mr. Foley.
Yes. Your variance has been approved. You have 180 days to pull your permit.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all very much.
And I believe that covers the agenda for the June 2022 Homewood BZA meeting. Is adjourned.